All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today for this webinar on sports law with Darren Heitner. My name is Elena Pastori. I will be facilitating the discussion, the conversation here between our participants and the speaker. So Darren, if you want to go ahead and give yourself a little bit of an introduction, kind of what you do, how did you get into the field, and a little bit about, some interesting things that you might have seen on the job.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. My name is Darren Heitner. I reside in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Typically this time of the year, it's either very sunny or raining. And this morning it's raining, and you may hear some thunder behind me, and perhaps even some lightning and rain during our conversation. So that's sort of the expectation during the summer months in South Florida. And obviously we're not really getting out much anyhow because of the COVID-19 concerns. A little bit of background. I was born and raised in South Florida. I went to the University of Florida for undergraduate studies, where I majored in political science and minored in geography and mass communication. I went straight through undergrad, where I started in 2003, to law school, which I started in 2007, also at the University of Florida. It's Levin College of Law. And I spent 3 years there before graduating. At the University of Florida Levin College of Law, there were not many sports and entertainment related classes. In fact, there was only one sports law seminar that was offered. It was a 2-credit course, and it was really only offered to people in their 3rd year of law school, taught by a very nice professor, but somebody who really wasn't keeping up to date on the biggest sports law related issues, and sort of used outdated text. But that was really my only opportunity to sort of learn about the space throughout my 7 years of college experience. So I kind of had to take it upon myself to learn more about sports law, and in particular at the time, what I thought I was going to do professionally, be a sports agent. So in between my sophomore and junior years of undergrad, I had the unique opportunity to intern at a sports agency in Atlanta called Career Sports Entertainment. Got my feet wet there. It was an excellent experience, but went back to the University of Florida for my junior year and realized that I was unsatisfied, that I loved the experience working at Career Sports Entertainment, but that here I was back on campus at the University of Florida without really any ability to expand upon what I had learned and gone through during those 2 to 3 months of the summer. And so it was actually December of 2005, roughly 15 years ago, that I created a website originally called I Want to Be a Sports Agent that morphed into Sports Agent Blog. It's found at sportsagentblog.com. And initially it was an effort to stay in touch with the sports agent community, continue to learn about what it entails, and also meet individuals who had become professionals and really experts in the sports agency field. And certainly that was a huge launch pad for me in getting my name out there at a very early age, brokering those relationships and learning more about the industry. During my law school experience, as I mentioned, there was only that one sports law seminar in my 3rd year. So what I did to be proactive and, again, meet new people and learn more about the sports law industry as a whole is I became president of the Sports Entertainment Arts Society and hosted an annual symposium on campus in Gainesville, brought in speakers at other times throughout the year. And that really, again, allowed me to build my own brand, meet new people who became friends, and what was crafted were lasting relationships with individuals who I still communicate with very frequently today. I left the University of Florida Levin College of Law in 2010 with the intention of practicing primarily and really solely as a sports agent, building up my own sports agency, which I had been working on throughout my 3 years of law school. And I moved back from Gainesville to Fort Lauderdale initially with that main goal in mind. It was only a few days after that I went to lunch with a few partners at a law firm who asked me what I was doing the next day. I explained working on my sports agency, and they said, well, why don't you come take a look at what we're doing? Yes, we want to start up a sports law division, but we have a litigation firm and we have a need for somebody who's entrepreneurial. Went in there, worked there for exactly a year. It was, again, primarily an insurance defense firm. And then 1 year later, moved from Fort Lauderdale to Miami, where I helped establish a brand new law firm with somebody roughly 25, 30 years older than me, who had worked at various big law firms and wanted to start up his own entertainment law firm. So from day one, we were working on folding chairs and folding tables and grew that to a very large, or to a much larger size before I ended up moving on in June 2014 to create my own law firm, which is Heitner, based here in Fort Lauderdale. So I moved from Fort Lauderdale to Miami, spent about 3.5 years there before moving back to Fort Lauderdale, where I've been really for the past 5-6 years. And I've developed my own law firm that, again, primarily focuses on sports entertainment related work, but we do everything from that to intellectual property, that being trademarks, copyrights, right of publicity, transactional work, anything surrounding the world of contract or business formation, litigation and arbitration, disputes, civil disputes. I don't do criminal. We have a family law division with a very exceptional family lawyer. I personally don't handle any of that. So we have a wide array of capacities at the firm that I've been building for the past 6 years, and now over 6 years because we're in August of this year. Separate and apart from that, as I mentioned, I started Sports Agent Blog. That led to the editorial department at Forbes noticing what I was doing in 2012, 7 years after creating the site. They asked me to start writing about sports business for Forbes, which I did for 6 years. One of my editors there moved on to Inc. magazine. She asked me to start writing there. I did that for 4 years. Right now, I continue to write at Above the Law and also for a magazine called Sports Pro. And separate and apart from that, with regard to writing, I was once upon a time asked to write a sports law treatise for the American Bar Association. I wrote a book called How to Play the Game, What Every Sports Attorney Needs to Know. They asked me to write a second edition of that. I did that as well. And I guess finally, what I've done in the sports world is I've taught quite a bit. So I started a new course at Indiana University Bloomington called Sports Agency Management, which I did for 3 years. Then I taught at my alma mater for roughly a year, and now I'm back teaching there at the law school. I'll be there in about a week and a half teaching a short abbreviated course on sports law. So that's a bit of my background. I'm happy to be here to answer whatever questions you may have, and don't be shy, ask away.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that really, in-depth description of your past and kind of what's led you to be where you are today. So for our audience here, for the questions that you're going to have, you'll see a chat box as well as a Q&A button on your panel. So please you can use either one of the functions. Make sure that you're sending it to me so that I can be sure to properly field the question. So when you're having the option of who to send it to, just please make sure you're sending it to me. And we do have a couple of questions already that I would like to start with. So especially in the atmosphere of everything that's going on today, we have a couple of sports teams that are talking about a name change, the Washington Redskins. So just sort of thinking about the climate of the world today and how that's impacting sports law, what I guess are your thoughts and what have you seen and what are your thoughts and views on what's going on and how it's going to permanently impact the world of sports?
Well, interestingly, I've been directly involved in some sort of capacity with regard to the rebranding of the Washington Redskins football team. And it's not just that team, it's the Cleveland Indians and others that are in the discussion, but certainly the Washington NFL team stood out amongst the various issues with regard to team names in professional sports. And so what happened was within the past month, there was so much criticism that the organization, the NFL team, decided it was going to conduct an internal investigation to determine whether or not it would be rebranding away from the Redskins. And it received a lot of pressure from various sponsors to actually go ahead with that rebranding effort. And what was really interesting is that ultimately the team did decide it was going to move away from that Redskins name, but it had not been proactive in protecting any sort of intellectual property, specifically trademarks, surrounding a potential new name. And so an individual came to me who had over the years applied for and even on some of the marks registered trademarks related to Washington team name trademarks. And he asked for my assistance to kind of guide him through the process, help deflect against some of the criticism and threats that he was receiving concerning that. And ultimately the team never reached out to us or really to anybody else. It did decide to rebrand away from Washington Redskins to Washington Football Team. What's interesting is my client actually owns the registration for Washington Football Club. So maybe that's one of the reasons why the team didn't decide to rebrand to that specific name. So it was pretty interesting to sort of live through at least a portion of the process of the team's rebranding.
Yeah, okay, that's interesting. And then the other side, I guess, to that is what about, that school in Tallahassee, the Seminoles? Do you think there is more pressure for the NFL to be changing they're changing their mascots as opposed to college teams?
Um, I don't know that there's necessarily more pressure. Perhaps from a financial perspective, as I wrote in one of my articles early on, I think you had an individual in Dan Snyder, the majority owner of the Washington NFL team, who at one point in time said in all caps that he would never change the team name. And here we are in 2020 actually changing it. And perhaps the precursor to all that, the main reason why Snyder ultimately decided to change the name, even though he was so adamant that it would never be changed, is because there was finally economic pressure applied to the extent where the naming rights sponsor, FedEx, came out and said, this is something you need to do, and threatened pulling out of sponsorship agreements. So I think the economic pressure on that level certainly played a big role and had heavy influence, whereas we haven't really seen that in college sports. And I've asked the question about, let's say, the Seminoles as an example. And while I haven't really looked into it in great depth myself, I've been told that I suppose there's some sort of relationship between the tribe and the university, and perhaps the university has received somewhat of a clearance to continue to use that name, whereas with Redskins, there were many tribes that were very vocal about the need to change it, that it was a disparaging and derogatory mark. So I think that there's likely factual nuances just between those two situations, but certainly I would say that there's also the financial circumstances in comparing professional sports teams with college teams perhaps as well.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point that you brought up about, this team has clearance from the tribe to use the name, whereas this team might not. And, obviously it's, I guess, nice or important that, this team was vetted or allowed, I guess, to use the name. But at the same time, the general public doesn't necessarily know all of those types of details. So, the general public that might either be pro or con this type of movement might still be very set in their opinions or their ways, and without knowing the details might just still be very tunnel vision in terms of their opinion and what they think it should be. So I think it's interesting to see how some people might think it's very okay for those reasons, and some people might still say this is very not okay for different reasons.
Yeah, no, it's true. I think the public opinion has been amplified certainly by social media, and we can see actual change occur from time to time just based on the public gathering. I think a new movement we've seen very recently is a hashtag We Are United campaign by many members of the Pac-12 football community, bargaining and asking for changes to be made. I actually wrote about it in the column today on Sports Pro about how perhaps this new environment could allow for unionization among college athletes where it never had before. So yeah, I think public attitude does play somewhat of a role. Then again, with an owner like Dan Snyder of the Washington NFL team, he may not ever care. It may have simply been the economics of the situation that caused some movement on his end.
Right. So one of the other questions we have is, while there are many amazing female athletes and great women reporters, are there a lot of women in sports and entertainment law?
A lot, no. But that is somewhat changing. And some of the people that I work with in the sports entertainment world are female. One of my mentors very early on at that company that I interned at back in 2005 that I mentioned is a woman named Molly Fletcher, who is no longer in the sports entertainment world, but she led the sports division of this big company, representing major coaches, representing major golfers, broadcasters, et cetera. So she's a great example. Someone like a Nicole Lynn, who works for Young Money, which is Lil Wayne's sports agency. She's an NFL agent who's doing great work. There's, forget her first name, Miali, who is at Rock Nation as a football agent, who's doing great work. Kelly Masters has her own football agency and is a lawyer. So they exist. Jill Smoller, a big agent at William Morris Endeavor. So again, I mean, there's opportunity, no doubt about it. But are there a lot of females in the space? No. In fact, maybe that's a good thing for females who want to break in, because it's been proven that they can. It's been proven there's an appetite, but there's just not as many of them out there. So maybe that's a distinguishing factor.
Yeah, I mean, it's always possible, and I guess there's always space, especially when, we said there are some, but not a lot. But I do think that women are also, sometimes intimidated by breaking into a space where there are not a lot of other women in. So, we'll see what happens in the future, but I definitely think that across industries, women are getting more comfortable with entering each of those. So we have another question that says, thanks for the talk. Do you think it's room for possible conflicts between players and NFL franchises due to COVID-19? Do you think?
Do I think that there's a potential conflict between players and teams because of COVID? Yeah, so every league is sort of coming up with, the leagues and the Players Association are sort of coming up with their own rules. They're being bargained. Major League Baseball has different rules than National Football League. In fact, the National Football League has a deadline of tomorrow at 4 p.m. for any player who wants to opt out, unless there's some sort of other distinguishing circumstances, such as a family member who becomes ill later on in the season. Just now, I follow everything very closely with my local teams. The Miami Dolphins just had its second wide receiver opt out, and Albert Wilson. Yesterday, Alan Hearns opted out. So we're seeing a lot of NFL players opt out. I think on the Patriots team alone, over 6 players have opted out. And there's, again, bargained for circumstances of what happens because of that. The players' normal salary will be tabled for future years, and they'll receive either $150,000 or I believe $350,000, depending on whether it's a voluntary opt-out or they have some sort of pre-existing condition. Meanwhile, with Major League Baseball, there's no deadline right now, or at least the deadline's not for some time. So we even saw, I think over the past week, there was a circumstance where a player Cespedes for the New York Mets, no one knew where he was one day. He just didn't report to the field, and there was a lot of concern. And then we found out after the game that he just decided to opt out because of coronavirus concerns. But there are mechanisms that have been put in place by and between the unions and the teams. Whether or not we believe them to be equitable and fair, I think that's a matter of subjectivity and perception. But at a minimum, the teams and the players associations are doing what they can to at least create a structure that allows the players to opt out if they don't feel comfortable playing.
The other thing that makes me think about is, are players that are more favorable or maybe make the team more money because they're the faces of the team versus the players that maybe don't play as much or aren't as well known? Are they going to be getting different, or some going to be more penalized than others for opting out this season? And how is that regulated, if at all? Or is
it's a standardized system. I mean, that one of the beauties of it is that no player is treated differently. under the system. So if a player is going to, let's say for NFL, as an example, if a player is going to opt out, it's really a matter of whether or not the player is voluntarily opting out without a pre-existing condition or has one of these pre-existing conditions. And that's the criteria. The salaries that the players would have received, again, would be tabled for the following year. But it's standardized. Whether you think that it's fair or not is a separate question.
Okay, true. We have a long one here. It says, Colin Kaepernick really started something by bringing politics into sports. How can sports help raise awareness about social justice issues? Some athletes don't feel like this is their job to be political, while others can't separate. What do you think about sports' ability to influence social movements?
Oh, I mean, sports, entertainers, athletes, celebrities, quote unquote influencers have a unique capacity to influence public opinion and even potentially dictate policy on a national level. So I'm never going to tell an athlete that he or she has an obligation to speak out or not speak out on an issue. I think that's a personal opinion. And whether or not the athlete cares about it, whether it affects his or her financial capacity due to speaking out, that's the prerogative of the athlete. I think it's interesting mentioning, saying that Colin Kaepernick started this off. For those of us who are, I think everyone here is young, we have that belief. But go back to Muhammad Ali. I mean, Muhammad Ali was extremely outspoken and suffered consequences of that early on. I mean, now we don't think about that because he's honored for everything that he's done. And when he passed, people didn't consider a lot of the hatred that he experienced. But he was very outspoken at a time that it was even more difficult to be outspoken. And there have been various athletes who have been in that position in the past. But obviously, in today's day and age, Colin Kaepernick is seen as someone akin to Ali in spurring a lot of this discussion, and others have followed. And certainly we've seen changes. I mean, who would have thought that you'd see basketball players performing in the bubble with, various things on their jerseys like Black Lives Matter as opposed to their name at the top? I would have never expected that. And that's just a byproduct of where we are as a society right
Yeah, I sorry if you hear a dog whimpering. Sorry, we have a puppy that we just got, and she just walked in the room and she just started crying, but she's okay. Okay. So far, looks like the NBA's show is doing well with the bubble. Do you imagine a similar scenario for football in terms of show and business?
In terms of show business, you said?
Show and business. So in terms of show and in terms of business, I think.
Do I expect to be similar to the NBA's bubble?
It's okay. I'll read it again. So far, it looks like the NBA's show is doing well with the bubble. Do you imagine a similar scenario for football in terms of show and business?
Well, the NFL is not looking to do a bubble, so that's a hard question to answer. It's also hard to answer whether or not there will be any games played. If there are games played, how many, or if there will be a full season. I think the NFL has a much more difficult process going forward than the NBA, because the NBA is truly in a bubble where people can't come in and out and are frequently tested, whereas that's not going to happen with the NFL. While there may not be fans in the seats, teams are currently going to be traveling and playing each other at their various home stadiums. So if everything goes according to the league's plan, yeah, the show will go on. And in fact, I suppose it'll be in better venues because it won't be captured in a bubble. It'll be at the normal stadiums. But there's just too many uncertainties at this time. I mean, as I mentioned, just as we were talking, another player decided that he wasn't going to play this season. And I think we'll see a lot more of that over the next 24 hours before this opt-out period closes.
And you said, when is the opt-out period closing again? Did you say
4
tomorrow?
p.m.
4? So time is ticking.
Time's ticking.
Okay, what is your opinion? This is a tough one. What is your opinion on college athletes getting paid? Will this change things for the sports landscape in college, or for how oh my gosh, college recruits are recruited, or high school, I guess, recruits are recruited for college?
Well, my personal position is that college athletes deserve the right to exploit their names, images, and likenesses for commercial gain. There's no detriment to the universities, to their conferences, to the NCAA, and that should absolutely be a right because every other individual on college campuses have that right. I was involved in the creation and promotion of a bill in Florida that provides college athletes those rights. It was passed earlier this year, signed into law by Governor DeSantis, and will go into effect July 2021. It'll be the first law that goes into effect across the country. California and Colorado have passed similar legislation to go into effect in 2023. So those are the only three states that have passed legislation, signed it into law with any effective date whatsoever, with Florida taking the lead. But again, I'm of a firm belief that this should be a right provided to all athletes on a national level. With regard to whether or not they deserve pay above and beyond that, I think from a normative standpoint, yes. I think they're providing amazing services to the university, and it's unfair that they're not compensated. But I think that figuring out how that will work is very challenging. Understand that the vast majority of college athletic programs are primarily funded by the revenues generated by the football programs, sometimes basketball programs. That provides the funding for the rest of the athletic programs at the university. There's something called Title IX, which is a federal act that requires equal treatment of both men and females. And so if college football players are going to get paid, then theoretically, the other athletes at the university, no matter what sport they play, need to also receive payment, and it could be argued on an equal level. I think that'd be very difficult. So the easy thing is to provide these college athletes the right to exploit their name, image, and likeness for commercial gain, which we plan to do at least in Florida. The harder process is allowing college athletes the ability to earn some sort of salary, especially without converting them into employees, which comes with other employment benefits, and potentially harms the NCAA with regard to their tax status. So that's a much more complicated issue, but simply talking from a theoretical perspective, I absolutely believe that they deserve it.
Yeah, I didn't even think about, athletes being employees in the whole, tax realm, like you just said. That definitely complicates things a lot. So,
Yeah.
I did take one sport class in my undergrad. So we did have a section on this, and I learned a little bit about the disputes, the arguments for both sides, and things like that. And just that alone, just the yes or no, do they deserve the pay, is, a lot of depth and a lot of different opinions and a lot of different things that come into play. And then when you add another, the layer of, okay, are they employees? Are they 1099s? Are they this or that? It just adds so much more. So you can really see why this is such a tough subject for people to, come to a conclusion and agreement on. So the next one we have here is, how has COVID changed the type of work that you're getting, or has it not affected it much? I know you said you're working on the Washington assignment or project, I guess you could say. So I know that
No,
you said,
that's not COVID related.
right.
It's affected. I mean, I've dealt with everything from landlord-tenant leases and purchase agreements that may have been affected by COVID, to cancellation of events and what the fallout may be there, to insurance policies and whether there's coverage for epidemics or pandemics. So certainly what's interesting is it hasn't really slowed down my own business. It's probably made us a bit more busy because there are so many legal issues surrounding coronavirus and pandemics in general. So we are seeing quite a bit of work that surrounds that particular area. And I can tell you that when we're negotiating these sort of deals, drafting anything, one thing that we're always very cognizant of is including language in a force majeure clause, which is if there's a disruption to the intent of the agreement proceeding as such, including language surrounding epidemics and pandemics, because oftentimes that was not expressly included in these types of provisions as something that could cause the parties the opportunity to either table the obligations of the agreement or even terminate the contract altogether.
Okay. Well, I'm happy to hear that you've been still keeping busy and that you haven't been affected. It's good to hear, some people out there that are still being able to, be
I don't like to brag about it. I don't, it's not, I feel for everyone who has been affected. I have a lot of friends and colleagues who have been, and it's unfortunate. And, hopefully we rebound as a society very quickly. I follow, any development that there may be on vaccines. In fact, the stock market's doing very well today because there's apparently momentum on that front. So that's great to see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, another question that just came in. It says, unrelated to sports, but how do you feel about students who want to have their rents, leases, et cetera, put on hold and or be able to break a lease due to COVID?
Well, again, that's something that we've sort of dealt with for various individuals. Tabling payments and being able to avoid evictions is something that you really have to look at on either city, county, state-by-state basis, because there have been rules put into place. Whether or not they still exist now or they've been removed is something that you really need to look into before you take a position. So doing that type of diligence is important. It's tough. I mean, whose side do you take? What if the landlord's also strong, right? And so, maybe it's not an extremely wealthy landlord who really requires payment in order to pay their own bills and survive. So you kind of have to look at every situation on a case-by-case basis. Do I feel remorse for the landlords who are billionaires and may have to wait a few months in order to receive rents? No. But do I feel remorse for the landlord who maybe only has a couple of properties and uses the income to survive and feed his family? Sure. And the same is true for the tenants. So I think it's really a matter of looking at it on a case-by-case basis, which is true for almost everything in the law.
Mm-hmm. I think that question might have been from a student talking more about the apartment complexes. So I know that in Gainesville, the complexes, there have been a lot that have been built in the recent years, these huge apartment complexes that house thousands of students. So they technically have nothing to do with the university itself, since it's a separate entity, but it's not like it's an individual house with an individual landlord. It's a big apartment complex that a corporation oversees. So does that change your answer, or does that
I don't know. I mean, what if every single individual in 1,000+ unit apartment doesn't pay? What does that do to the corporate entity behind it? I mean, does it fold? Does it mean that that there won't be availability for people to live there in the future? I don't know. I mean, again, that's why you kind of have to look at it on a case-by-case basis. Absolutely, to the extent that a big corporation can delay payments and still survive, and allow individual tenants or students to just also survive during that time period, that's beneficial for the world at large. But it's hard for me to just say globally that tenants in every situation should be able to not have to pay, or at least table their payments. It's a very difficult situation that that we're living through, and obviously, I just try not to take a generalized position one way or the other without looking at the specifics of any situation.
Right. Every situation varies so much depending on what it's being affected by. So, okay, another unrelated to sports question. Do you think colleges should reduce their tuition because of online classes? Some parents are suing colleges, I didn't know that, etc. Because of this. What do you think?
I haven't followed those cases closely, but they've made headlines. I've just seen that there's some litigation out there on this particular subject. Here's the thing that I wrestle with. because, I mean, even back when I was in undergrad between 2003 and 2007, I used to love it when I could take an online class. Like, I paid the same amount of money for the online class as I would for the in-person class, but the luxury to be able to take it from wherever, including in my own dorm room, was like, I would probably pay extra. So it's interesting that you know, to take the position that if it's online, there should be a reduction in cost. Now, if you look at it from another lens, I think irrespective of whether it's an online course or an in-person course, the fees are crazy. And that all depends. Like if you're an in-state individual and you're going to the University of Florida, you get a nice deal, right? But if you're, you know, out of state coming to the University of Florida, my understanding is you're paying an exorbitant amount of money, close to what you'd be paying for a private school. And similarly for a Florida resident going to another state school outside of Florida. So I don't have a position necessarily on whether or not the prices should go down because it's online. My other understanding, I mean, I'm teaching a course in a week and a half. That course, the school has given the students the option of either attending in person or online. Well, if you're given that option and you're not forced to take it online, then certainly I think in that instance, it doesn't necessitate a reduction in fee. Again, there's a separate conversation as to whether or not in whole, students are being charged too much for their education.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, during my undergrad as well, most of my classes were online anyway because I was a business major, but I loved having them online because you just have so much flexibility.
Yeah,
So, I think people's concerns is more so with the facilities and, not being able to use the libraries or things like that, as opposed to necessarily the classes being
do we
online.
really need libraries in 2020 to get to get the information? I mean, that's a serious question. I don't know. I'm not a student in today's day and age, but I can't remember the last time I went to a library.
Yeah, I mean, I only would use them to study. I don't think most people go there actually to get books.
Go to Starbucks.
But yeah, Starbucks. Okay, we have someone else. If I'm interested in sports law, do you hire interns? Haha.
Hmm. Not if you laugh
Not.
about it.
It says they
Yeah,
wrote that.
we hire law clerks. So the requirement is that you have at least 1 year of legal education under your belt. And then we do every semester take on at least one law clerk to assist us. This past semester we had somebody from UF Law and also from New Hampshire Law.
Okay, awesome. This is an anonymous person, so they'll have to find you after if they are
That was smart.
eligible. Okay, another one. What advice do you have for students who want to go into sports law?
For students in undergrad or in law school?
They didn't say, they just said.
Well,
Undergrad,
I was asked this question yesterday in a webinar, and the bottom line is this: don't worry about practicing sports law. If you're so focused on practicing sports law, you're probably going to practice. Worry about figuring out how you can become the best practitioner in a specific area. A lot of sports law is a combination of other areas. So for me, one big way that I'm able to differentiate myself is my focus on intellectual property. And I hope I've become somewhat of an expert in that area, so that if somebody thinks that if somebody, especially in sports, says I want a trademark, got to call them, right? So you could do that with criminal work, you could do that with family law work, you could do that with anything. So find what you're passionate about outside of sport, become the best at that, and then try to utilize that expertise to get into the realm of sports.
Okay. I think that's awesome advice. I think, I saw this when I was an undergrad. People get too caught up with what they're majoring in or what, the title of their degree and things like that. And I just, I tell people I think it's important to focus on or find what you're good at and what you like and what you enjoy, because, a degree is great. But, a lot of people don't necessarily practice exactly what their degree is in. And if you can find what you like, you can learn, you know, a lot of times whatever else you need to after, whether it is getting another technical degree or just pursuing another path that is supported by your company or whoever it is that you're working with. So I think that's important. And then unless we have another question come in, the last question that I personally have for you, oh wait, I spoke too soon. Okay, here we go. I'll save my question. Has there been a problem with players being uninterested in playing during short seasons or not wanting to potentially put family members at risk by playing and training?
Oh, 100%. I mean, we're seeing that play out. We've had a lot of basketball players opt out of performing even in the bubble. We've seen a lot of baseball players who have decided to opt out, and we're seeing NFL players, as I mentioned, over the next 24 hours, we're going to see more and more of them. So without a doubt, we're seeing players decide that it's just not worth it for them to risk it, whether they have young children at home, whether they have family members who are susceptible of catching it, whether they just don't think they've made enough money throughout their careers that forfeiting a big paycheck for one season is worth it to them. So yes, we're seeing nonstop.
Okay, what are the kinds of things that you can apply for a patent or copyright? If it is an idea, can you copyright it or patent it? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I could teach an entire semester on this. I'll keep it brief. Ideas are not protectable, whether it's copyright, patent, trademark. So ideas themselves you cannot protect, and there's a good reason for that, because if you protected an idea, then that would stifle entrepreneurship and innovation. So there has to be something proprietary about it, something unique to it. Copyright, we're talking about anything that's fixed in a tangible medium. So like artwork, for instance, or music. Obviously, we don't want people stealing that from one another, copying. Trademarking is all about brand and identification, like McDonald's or Nike brand names. We don't want others creating similar names that are likely to be confused. Patents is about, creating a unique innovation, some sort of process, utility, etc. So those are the things that can be protected. Ideas themselves.
Okay. All right, the last one now that we have is, it is very interesting the role of sports stars being influencers on their social media. Could the current fashion of filming internal situations like the bubble in the NBA trigger conflicts with the NBA or the franchise? Or on the contrary, that really helps the business?
The current fashion of filming internal situations like the bubble trigger conflict. Well, no, the NBA is behind it, and so are the teams. So, you're saying could the players creating content be an issue with the league or with the franchise?
Yeah, I think.
Not in any way that, to me, the situation is the same as it was before from this perspective. The players have to be cautious to not utilize any sort of intellectual property that may be owned by another person or by the league without permission. But no, I think the leagues and the teams love the creation and dissemination of content and the engagement with the fans. It's bringing eyeballs. I mean, the viewership has been tremendous since the NBA resumed. And I think a part of that is all the lead up to it and the players promoting things on social media about what's life like in the bubble. It's been great. So no, I would think that the league and the teams actually really welcome.
Okay. Awesome. Well, that's all the questions. Thank you so much for joining.
All right.
Today.
Thanks for having me.
Everything. Yeah, no, this is awesome. So we are recording this so we can share it with those that wanted to attend but could not attend today, and hopefully others that will find this helpful. So thank you so much for sharing. It was great chatting with you today.
All right. Please share a link with me.
I will. Bye, everyone.
Take care.